Hello, everybody. This is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where probably an hour of your time may get you to the divine. Today, we're going to have an interview with a gentleman by the name of David, and David is going to. We're going to talk about the status of the church. So this will be an ongoing series with people who I invite in, and I would really like to bring in lay people. And so we had an interview with. Oh, sorry. We had an interview with Joseph last week on the status of the church. So it's going to be an ongoing series where I'm just going to keep that title and have different men and women on who want to give their take on the status of the church. And we'll just talk about politics. As I've mentioned, or you might have noticed, I don't do a lot of political episodes per se. They're mostly on Catholic living or Catholic history and, of course, on apologetics. But I like to do the live streams to talk about whatever political stuff you guys want to talk about. You're more than welcome, of course, to call in. Of course, this is only for the live people. And I know at the beginning here, there's not a lot of people watching this live, but you're more than welcome to call in. And then, of course, whatever our guest wants to talk about. So I'm going to bring on David here. David, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, let me bring it on. There you are. Let's get your screen bigger here. All right, David, tell us about yourself. Where do you live? Give us a little background on your history. Are you a convert, revert? Let's just get that story. Your background.
So I live in Dallas, but I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up Catholic. I was an altar boy. I've rarely ever missed Mass since I was a child, unless I was sick or something. So I've been consistently attending church, attending Mass since I was a little kid. My father grew up Catholic also. My mother is a convert. My parents married in the mid-70s, and my mother grew up Presbyterian. And then she became Catholic. I was at the Mass when she became Catholic, when she was a catechumen. That was about 20 years ago, around 99 or... Sorry, you hear me?
How did they meet? I'm just curious how your parents met, since they were co-religionists.
Yeah, so my parents basically broke some rules that you've suggested in the past in terms of long distance relationships. My father, they met in 1971. My father was in the Army, and he was stationed in Alaska.
Oh, I used to live there. What town was he? Was he probably around Anchorage?
Fairbanks. Yep.
Oh, okay, that's where I used to live. That's where the University of Alaska's at. Cool.
Yeah, I lived there in 2008 to 2009 for some work that I was doing. But so I'm familiar with Alaska. But my father was stationed up there for a couple of years, and my mother is from Los Angeles. She was on a trip with the USO with Bob Hope, and was entertaining troops during Vietnam. And she went up to Fairbanks for like 3 days. And it's really remarkable how they met, because my father really liked her, and they didn't spend a whole lot of time together during that trip. But once he got some leave, he traveled down to the Los Angeles area and found my mother. It took him about a week, no internet, just going from, I guess, one USO place to another and bribing people. Finally met my mother.
What was her role in the Bob Hope thing? What was she doing?
They're just go to dances before the troops. Usually they would have a dance before the troops would get shipped off to Vietnam. So she would just dance with the troops, So
she was on the Bob Hope tour as a dancer. That was like her official job, is that she was dancing, like doing a little show before he would come on?
Well, no, she wasn't dancing in front of troops. She would literally go and dance with soldiers. There were probably, I think there were like 30 young women, like 22-year-olds on these trips that she would go on. So that's what she would do.
So Bob Hope would have, I'm just curious how this works, because I've seen like snippets from the old Bob Hope special. So Bob Hope would bring a bunch of women on these tours, and their job would be to dance with various men at the various.
Yeah.
Okay. So your dad saw her, and as Cristobal says, love at first sight. He pursued her, and then they got married, and then.
Well, not quite. It was, and I want to go through this because it's significant to my upbringing, and probably it's one of the reasons why I'm single, because my expectations are much higher and not realistic, and I understand that, and I'm anyway. So they were long distance for 2 years, and he invited my mother on that trip to visit him in Connecticut. And at that time, that was before airline deregulation, and she paid for her own ticket. And the equivalent of a ticket from Los Angeles to New York in our dollars now is like $3,000, and she paid for it herself. And so I guess every 6 months they would see each other. And then she eventually, after 2 years, she moved to Connecticut, and she lived by herself because my dad wouldn't cohabitate, neither would she. And then after another 2 years, they got married over my both of their mother's objections. You know, my father's mother had a problem with the fact that my mom wasn't Catholic, and my mother's mother had a problem with the fact that my father was Catholic.
And so your mother never converted?
She did. Yeah, she did. She converted after about, they've been married for about 25 or 30 years. She converted, and I was at the mass when she did.
What was her reasoning for not converting, like after the marriage? Was she a stalwart Presbyterian? Was it a lot of fights of sola fide? Sola fide is not right. Was your dad really informed in the faith, or she was just like, I'll wait 25 years?
No, she was actually, she was a Sunday school teacher at the local Protestant church in Connecticut. And she would teach, and it was a pretty good sized Sunday school. They had about, it was a K through 12 situation. And the United Church of Christ was becoming much more liberal at that time, to the point where they wanted her to teach and to implement a curriculum that homosexuality to very new. And at that point, she just said, I won't do this. I'll quit before I do this. I'm not going to implement this. And she left.
What year was that?
99, 2000, 98, 97.
Wow.
Around
So
that.
they were already bringing in the pro-homosexual stuff 20 years ago in that church?
They were pushing open and affirming. And so when you drive around New England and you see, and this is the, you know how you've spent time in New England, how there's always a green and then there's the white church. Yeah. Well, this was the white church in our town. And now on the front of it, there's a little rainbow thing that says we are an open and affirming church. Okay. And they espouse homosexuality. My mother just had a real problem with this. And so then it took about a year. And then she said, I think I need to become Catholic. She was coming to church with us more and more. When I was a little kid, it was just my dad, my brother, and me. We would always go to church. My mom would go to her church. And that was until I was about 15 or 16 when this was going on. And then she was with us more and more frequently. And then she said, I'm going to become Catholic. And I tell friends this all the time. My mother is far more knowledgeable about the Catholic Church and Catholic teachings than my father is, significantly. And I found that with converts. And frankly, and that's the same way with me. Like, I have to make a real effort to understand things, even though I've grown up with this. My father's always just said, just say some prayers, be thankful for what you have, and say, get on your knees and say some prayers when we're in church. My mother is much more understanding of Catholic teaching, Catholic tradition. Now, my mother's mother, the reason that she had a problem with my parents marrying was because she passed away 22 years ago, but I think it was because I think she was pro-choice. I think and she was concerned that if my mother was pregnant and there was a problem with the pregnancy, that my father would not choose to have an abortion.
Heaven forbid.
Yeah. And I asked my mother about this a few months ago, and she said, no, it would never be up to my mother. She said, I would never, under any circumstances, have an abortion. I would rather die than do that. Like, you would never kill my child. So my mother is ever since I was a little kid, and even more so now, she's extraordinarily pro-life. She talks about it all the time. Like she's one of the women, because now she's 73. She'll be one of the women you see going out at the abortion clinic, standing there praying the rosary.
So when you were growing up, then your mother was she going to mass with you guys? And she hadn't converted yet, clearly, but how would you describe your Catholic upbringing? So your dad, you said, was not too knowledgeable in the faith. Did you go to Catholic school? Were you going to mass weekly? Did you know about the faith pretty well?
Yeah, I went to mass weekly. As I said, it was my father, my brother, and me. We would go to mass every week. I would go to Sunday school over at my mother's church, that United Church of Christ. I would go over there. I would walk over there for Sunday school after Catholic Mass. My dad wouldn't let me go unless I had gone to Mass first. While at the same time, I was an altar boy. I was an altar boy from when I was, I want to say when I was like 8 or 9 until I was about 11, I think. I would usually I would ride my bike to church in the morning. The Mass was at 7:30, and then I would walk to school after that if I was serving. Never told anybody in school what I was doing, so I didn't want to get made fun of. And then, and that was a public school. I didn't go to Catholic school. Then after 5th grade, my parents pulled me out of public school and put me in private school, a secular private school, the same school that my father went to in the 60s, which is, that's where I went to. And then after that, I continued going to Mass. It was around that time when my mother converted. And then when I went to college, I went to Texas A&M, and they have a very strong Catholic community there. Yeah. I mean, very strong. I think they turn out something like more priests than any other region of the country, right from St. Mary's there in College Station. So,
well, it's not surprising they would have a more vibrant Catholic community than UT Austin's Catholic. I was working on my PhD for a little while in the early noughts, and I did go to Mass over at the chapel at UT Austin, and it should be part of liturgical abuses, part 6. It's just the typical kind of modernist church. But so just really quick before we get to your more your adult years. So when you went to the Church of Christ, when you were going back and forth,
United Church of Christ, it's different.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you were going to that church, though, were they like, "Oh, you're damned, you're a Catholic"? Were they giving you a lot of grief because you're a Catholic, or were they just like, "Eh"?
I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them. They were confused. And at that, remember, I was only, I was like 11 or 12 years old at that time. So I didn't completely understand the differences, but there was definitely an anti-Catholic sentiment that went through. And something that I remember was my parents also sent me to a summer camp that was run by the United Church of Christ back then. And it was just, a camp to go to. And I remember at one point during those years, this woman who was one of the counselors, I guess, whatever, leaders or whatever they call them, was very anti-Catholic. She started talking about contraception and how she didn't agree with the Catholic Church's teachings on contraception, and was espousing this to little kids. And I didn't have an understanding of sex or sexuality at the time, or what contraception was, or why she was talking about this. And as I said, that was around the time my mother was converting, and as it turns out, there were open homosexuals at that summer camp. Which
shocking that there were homosexuals at a camp where they could have access and groom kids. Shocking.
Yeah. So
no, somebody asked, Church of Christ, is Church of Christ Calvinist? Because you had mentioned that you had a Presbyterian upbringing.
My mother had a Presbyterian upbringing. I didn't. Okay. What I'm talking about was the United Church of Christ. The Church of Christ itself is very conservative. That's dominates in the American South. The United Church of Christ is very liberal. They were marrying homosexuals, back in 2000, 2001. Two different things. I've never been to a Church of Christ before, and I will never go into a United Church of Christ again.
Do you know if they're nominally under like a national Church of Christ, and then there's different branches?
Yes. So if you just Google or look up, do a web search on the United Church of Christ, you can read about this. This is in around that time, they did a nationwide campaign where they had these ads saying, it was like in front of a club, and they were saying, "Oh no, you can't come in here to a couple of homosexuals, then to a couple of African Americans and other people. But if you were white, you'd say, oh yeah, you come on into the club." And then they said, "Oh, the United Church of Christ, our hearts, our minds, and our doors are always open to you." And it was an anti-Catholic kind of thing as well.
Because I've talked about that, like our Catholic, and guys, for you guys are going to watch, we are going to get to the article and start dissecting this article about why Catholics aren't going to Mass. But I've done an episode on like, are Catholics as bigoted toward Protestants as Protestants are bigoted toward Catholic? And of course, people will say that I have a Catholic bias, but from my experience, of course, the Protestants have a latent, if not an overt prejudice, if not outright hatred for Catholicism. Whereas most Catholics are just like, there's so many of you denominations, I can't even keep up enough to dislike you, and or I barely care enough about my own faith to really care about you, because most Catholics are indifferentists, and they're like, well, we're different spokes of the wheel. And I would say the only Catholics I would really not like Protestants would be the more traditional, mad trad types who maybe know the history more. But
Yeah.
I mean, what's your take? Do you think that there's this deep-seated Protestant hatred in the Catholic circles?
I don't think so. I've never heard that before, and I've certainly never heard a priest stand up and openly, like, vehemently say, these people are wrong, and like I've never heard that before. But I certainly have heard that from several different Protestant faiths, including non-denominational churches like your Joel Osteen types. There's a big one here in Dallas, and I have friends who go to these kinds of churches, and then through some of my traveling and the work that I do, I've attended non-denominational churches. Just if I'm invited by somebody who I'm working with, I'll say, yeah, sure, I'll go to church with you. Now, I always go to mass on the weekends because I don't consider that to be sometimes anything other than going to a motivational speech, so I'll give that caveat. I don't replace going to mass with going to another church.
No. Actually, by canon law, we're not even supposed to go to any Protestant services. It's completely prohibited.
Yeah, I know. But if I'm invited, I figure respectfully I'll go and I'll listen. And if they want to talk to me about it, I will. But I've heard an anti-Catholic fervor through these services, and sometimes I'll go online and I'll watch a service from a different denomination. I'm like, this is so wrong. This doesn't even.
Okay, so I want to mention this because I was talking to somebody yesterday, and we were having this conversation. It got a little heated, and I was saying that when Protestant leaders, and this person was a convert, she came to the Catholic faith, but I was saying when Protestant leaders are on the pulpit saying outright lies, like that the Catholic Church believes that works can get you into heaven. I mean, that's Pelagianism. We threw out that heresy 1,700 years ago, or like we worship Mary as a goddess.
Yeah.
And I told her, I said, when Protestant pastors say this, when they could easily go to the catechism and see that we don't, or they could just do a Google search, do Catholics worship statues, and go to Catholic Answers, yet they still perpetuate this lie. This is a sin of negligence. This is a sin of blasphemy. And she was saying, well, in all my years of going to Protestant churches, I rarely or never heard pulpit speaking that was anti-Catholic. It was mostly just kind of like among friends, those little side things. And so you brought it up. You've gone to some of these where the pulpit, they're actually saying outright lies, things that they could just Google and realize that we don't do, but they do it because it keeps people in their church and it keeps them in that anti-Catholic stance.
Yeah, and it's usually in the big mega churches where you have 5,000 or 10,000 people. It's a very, very large churches that do this. But yeah,
we have a church called Cornerstone in the town that I live in. It's a big one, and they're known to be avowed anti-Catholics. And I mean, it's a problem. Like I said, I've heard at the most, growing up in Novus Ordo, hearing Novus Ordo homilies. I mean, at the most, I'll hear, pray for our separated brethren, pray for our brothers in Christ. But it is so rare. I did go to an SSPX service once, and it was like maybe the only time where I heard somebody actually say Protestants are in trouble, Protestants that come to Holy Mother Church. But I mean, you rarely ever hear any type of apologetics, like anyone who believes in sola scriptura or sola fide is wrong, and needs to come to church. Needs to come to the Catholic Church. You really hear that. It's just kind of the mealy mouth. Jesus is a hippie, love everybody, social justice. I mean, you've got enough churches, Catholic churches, to know that. But
Cornerstone is like a nation. It's like a 7-Eleven. It's like a nationwide network of certain churches, and they do have sort of a loosely. It's like a church franchise. There are cornerstones. Yeah, it is. It isn't just in South Texas. There's a bunch up here. They have them in Northern Virginia. I used to live in I lived in Northern Virginia for a while. During that time, I attended the National Shrine was where I went to every Sunday, which is an interesting experience.
Well, when I drive by the Cornerstone, it looks like a Masonic temple. It truly has more of an exterior look. It doesn't look like anything that's even Protestant that would have the spire with the cross, like some of the mainstream denominations. You couldn't tell that it's anything Christian related, and I don't think there's a coincidence there. But either way, so let's get to your adulthood. You did mention you're not married, so I mean we can talk about Catholic dating if you want later on. What is your mass preference, and how did you get to that mass preference?
Well, I've only ever attended, I guess, what you call the Our Lady of Suburbia kind of parish.
Yeah.
I've never, and I suppose that's out of necessity. I don't always find, I'm not always home on the weekends, so I'll just Google, okay, where's the nearest Catholic church and that I can go to tomorrow, and then I'll go to it, which has its, pluses and minuses, I suppose. But I've never attended a Latin mass, so I haven't. It's difficult for me to compare because I've only ever been to, an English mass.
Would you be interested to go into a Latin mass? Because there are some in the Metroplex. There are some.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Maybe I'll come down to San Antonio and go with you at some point. But
well, I hate to tell you, we don't have a Latin mass here. So, but Dallas Metroplex does have. They do have an ordinariate, which is the national diocese I go to. It's in Fort Worth, I believe. You just have to Google it.
Okay.
But my understanding is that there is a Latin mass, because I knew a woman that lived in the Metroplex who would drive, I think maybe toward toward Denton. I think it's in that northern.
Like Collin County up there.
Yeah, it's somewhere going.
Yeah, Gregory, can you explain something to me? Because it was my understanding, like if you're not, I thought you were going to a Latin mass. Because the thing that's held me back from doing that is thinking, I don't speak Latin. What am I going to get out of this if it's not in English? So can you just explain that a little bit?
Yes, and I just Googled Latin Mass in Dallas just to follow up. So it's Mater Dei, which means Mother of God in Latin, and it is over off of 12. I mean, there's so many highways in the Metroplex.
Yeah.
It's looks like it's at Irving.
Oh, okay.
There's one there.
Yeah. Okay.
There's one there. Okay, so Latin Mass. So where I live, we don't have a Latin Mass. I mean, I should say that. That's not true. There is one parish that's Novus Ordo, Our Lady of Suburbia, that does have one Latin Mass. And then we have the SSPX, which is a very small chapel. I mean, it's like a renovated house. It's that small. And that's all we have where I live. The Latin Mass. Why should people go to Latin Mass? Well, first of all, I mean, there's no obligation to go to a Latin Mass. If people like a reverential Novus Ordo Mass, that's great. I would tell all of you guys not to go to modernist, liturgical dance inspired, Christian pop music, Our Lady of Suburbia parishes. And to be fair, I did borrow that phrase from Father McTeague of the Catholic Current. I was interviewed by him a couple months ago. He has a national radio channel, and he uses it. I heard it. I want to give him credit where credit's due. I did not come up with Our Lady of Suburbia. So,
no, I did hear you on that.
Yeah. So Latin Mass. It's the Mass of our ancestors. It's the Mass of the patrimony. It's the Mass that has not changed in 500 years. It's the Mass that all of the saints throughout history went to. The English vernacular Mass only came around only 50 years ago. And I would say the Latin Mass is the most solemn Mass. You're not going to see any liturgical abuses in it because it's the same Mass in its etched form since Pius V in the 1560s. He was the one who formalized that Mass. So that Mass has not changed in 500, almost 400 or 500 years. And really the Latin Mass has only had little modifications from around 480 to 1500 when St. Pius V kind of formalized it. And so it's essentially the same Mass of our ancestors. And there's going to be I wouldn't say no, but there'll be very little liturgical abuses because, with the TLM types, it's all about doing it right. So you're not going to get any of these kooky abuses. I think some that go to TLM will tell you that the words of consecration haven't been messed with. I don't really touch that. Some believe that with the translation into English that the words of consecration have changed, and therefore the Eucharist is not even present in the Novus Ordo Mass. I don't really know. That's above my pay grade, to be honest. I would just tell you that it's a more solemn experience, and the music's better, and I think the people there. And I did an episode on this too, like the Catholic belief in Our Lady of Suburbia is missing in terms of the support for gay marriage, the support for abortion, the support for transgenderism. We know that the beliefs of the Real Presence, depending on which poll you look at, hovers from 70 to 80% in the typical Novus Ordo area. But if you look at these statistics, contraception is normalized over there. But if you look at the TLM adherence or ordinary adherence, I mean, it's like 1% in all of those things that do support it. So if you want to be around active Catholics who know the faith too and love the faith, then I would go to the TLM. But I would just try it out. I mean, you do have one in the Dallas area, and just see what it's like. And I do have an episode coming out in a month, like 7 things to prepare you to go into a Latin Mass. I know Religious Hippie, I think, did an episode too, and you could, Google that, because it is a major change going from Novus Ordo to the Latin Mass. So just some things to prep for that I would recommend. But I would definitely recommend you go. So you go to Novus Ordo, and do you go to, I know you pop around in different parishes, but are you attracted to the Christian pop music Novus Ordo, or do you like more of the piano folk music of the 70s, which is still pretty pervasive?
Actually, if I had my choice, I like to hear the chants. I like the chants, that kind of music. I think what you're describing, in the Latin Mass, I guess that's the traditional. The pop music isn't something that attracts me to it. I
don't think anyone's attracted by the pop music.
Yeah.
I mean, the church will tell you the teenagers are. If you've ever gone to a teen mass, the teen masses are the worst.
Yeah.
Growing up, it was just bad Christian pop. My old parish growing up, I went to a Catholic school my whole life, up till I graduated from college. And they would have the kids come up to the altar, surround the altar, and they would dance during the consecration songs.
Wow. I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
I've never seen that before. I mean, when I was in college at that St. Mary's in College Station, they never did anything like that. I mean, the music was a little bit, and it wasn't Christian pop either, but it was a little bit more upbeat than like you weren't hearing like monk chants throughout the Mass.
Right.
Certain times of the year. What I do now, for the most part, I do attend the same. For a long time, I attended the Guadalupe Cathedral in downtown Dallas. It's a beautiful church, but they were pushing. They were openly pushing illegal immigration so much that I was just like, you know what, I can't be here anymore. And so that's when I found Holy Trinity, which is actually in the gay part of Dallas. And so I didn't, until about a week ago, somebody brought it up to me, like, it's a liberal parish. I was like, really? Because I haven't heard them espousing homosexuality. They said, well, they don't stand up and condemn people as much. And I was like, well, come to think of it, I've never really heard homosexuals condemned ever in a Catholic Mass. And there are a lot. That's something else I wanted to discuss when I was thinking about what we were going to talk about, are all the things that I've learned from you. I've learned far more from you in a lot of ways than I have from a lot of priests. And I've had conversations with them, and they don't want to talk about controversial things, and I think that's just because they don't want to lose half the congregation. So.
Yeah, no doubt. And especially after COVID, in the Novus Ordo parishes, they're having problems bringing people back. And I mean, even before that, it was just kind of this idea that, I mean, when you go to a Latin Mass or an ordinary Mass, you'll definitely see the difference, because like the age demographic is not going to be skewing toward 55-year-old women, like at the typical Novus Ordo parish, where you don't see a lot of families, because honestly, most of those families have contracepted their kids out of existence. And those who don't contracept go to the TLM or the ordinariate. But you'll just see this idea of people coming in late. Nobody's really singing, partly because the choir is more watch me than trying to encourage you to sing, which is the job of the choir. And then you'll see people receive the Eucharist, not always that solemnly, and then they'll leave, before the blessing. And it's just this kind of lukewarm faith. And you're right. I think those priests, and I have an episode like what should Novus Ordo parishes learn from TLM, and where they're booming, right? Novus Ordo parishes are having problems filling up the pews. You go to TLM, they're overflowing. So common sense would suggest that these pastors would be like, wow, maybe I should do a little field trip to these rumored churches that they actually have full pews, and maybe talk to their pastors. But most of these guys are in the spirit of Vatican II, and a lot of them are just entrenched in their ways and don't want to do that, right?
Yeah, well, during COVID, everything shut down. Especially here in Dallas, everything shut down. It was a ghost town around here, which is weird for such a big city. But I missed Mass for 2 weeks. I was watching it on the computer here. And then I looked out and I was like, oh, wait a minute, Fort Worth is open. Okay. So every Sunday I just, drove 45 minutes west, and I went to Mass at Fort Worth, and the church was full. And that was at the downtown cathedral there. It's not a big cathedral, it's a smaller one. And it was actually during one of those weeks when you talked about the traditional Mass, because I remember you mentioning in churches like that, it may have actually been one. I'd have to look it up, but there were young women there wearing the veils.
Yeah.
So I may have actually attended that, but it was a booming service. But the one, the church that I attend here it's in the Oak Lawn region of Dallas. It's full. It's full every Sunday. And one of the things that actually attracted me to it was, for the first time, and I'm 39 now, and I attended Mass for the most part by myself throughout my 20s and my 30s. Oftentimes, until I was about 35, I was the youngest person there.
Yeah.
And it was just depressing. It's like, well, this is boomers, and I'm the youngest person here. And when I go back to Connecticut, and this is about a year or so ago, I had a woman who was my she's probably about 80 years old now. She was my nurse when I was in elementary school. And she goes, well, David, why aren't you married? And I looked at her and I said, why am I married? And I didn't say, well, I don't want to deal with the court system or anything. I just said, okay, well, Mrs. Brown, how many young women do you see in there? She goes, none. And it's like, well, how am I going to meet women? Am I going to go to bars? I mean, how am I going to find?
Good luck on that.
I said, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, I'm not going to risk, you want me to, like, you tell me, what am I supposed to do? Like, there's no young women in here for me to meet. So, if that's what that means.
You can find good Catholic women at Tinder, right?
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. Let me get on Tinder and see what pops up there.
Well, really quickly, I did Google Ordinary of the Chair of St. Peter, which is essentially the trappings of the Latin Mass, but it's in English. They have one in Fort Worth. It's at St. Thomas Becket, the old Catholic bishop who got martyred by Henry II way back in the 11th century. And it's on Loop 820, Southwest Loop 820 in Fort Worth. So it's on the far west side.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a far drive. But you do have those two options. And of course, I would recommend you to go there Mater Dei, just to, but ultimately, it's up to you. But let's get to this article, because we've already gone in 20 minutes here. So 30 minutes. David sent me this article, and he wanted me to read it. And I read it, and I thought it'd be good to bring him on to just talk about it, because it's why the church is failing in the West. So let me show this. Share screen. David, let me know if you can see it when it comes up. If not, kind of defeats the purpose.
I see it.
All right. So this is from National Catholic Reporter, which is typically known to be a modernist, leftist Catholic outlet. Like almost all of the Catholic outlets are. Yeah. All right. So, let's get to the points here. So there's theories as to why the church is failing in the West. So I'm going to highlight this point here. The Catholic hierarchy tends to blame contemporary culture for the church's problems. Consumerism, individualism, and secularism top their list of negative forces. The media bombards people with images and messages that are antithetical to Christianity. Happiness comes from sex, money, and power. Life is too busy with work and leisure to have time for religion. I mean, I would agree with that. Sure. I mean, you certainly see in the churches that there are much, tons of secular influences have come into the churches.
Yeah.
That ethnic neighborhoods that once reinforced religious communities and values have seen a decline as their residents have moved to the suburbs. That is true. As Catholics join the mainstream, they lost their roots. Fewer children go to Catholic schools. Interfaith marriages have increased as young Catholics socialize with non-Catholics. That is true. And as they got better educated, they were less likely to follow the clergy without questions. I mean, anecdotally, that is true. It's like how many, let me unshare here. Let me get back in here. There you go. How many wealthy people do people know that practice their faith? And you just see this, I don't know, correlation, causation. Jesus mentions it in the Bible to the rich man, and James mentions it. And it's harder for a rich man, for the needle to go, a camel to go through the eye of a needle, and a rich man to go to heaven. So, I mean, you see this, that how many really wealthy people do you see are still religious? Most of the time, the more money you make, the less religious you are. And I think that happens in all the denominations for sure. But
yeah, I agree with that. I'm trying to think of wealthy people who I know who attend mass. I can think of a few. They're older. I mean, older people I knew growing up. So.
It's like with the parable of the sower. I had an episode on that. It's like a lot of Catholics and a lot of Christians want to believe that we're in the rich soil, but I think the large majority of Catholics are actually in the soil and being choked by the weeds, and the weeds are the pleasures of today, which is mostly going to be wealth. So I think it is a constant temptation to worship mammon and to worship money. And I would see this in the Catholic world. I would see this everywhere. I mean, even someone like Mel Gibson, who built his own traditional church on his property, he probably deals with that. We could name like Catholic content creators that I think are struggling with this and might not even know it. But I think like just going to church weekly is not enough for me to think that they're not adhering to mammon. I think one of them is if you're very wealthy, you should be donating 50% to the church instead of, let's say, 4%, 5%, and doing works of mercy and so forth. But let's keep going here.
Yeah.
Tell me when you see it on the screen.
I see it. Get it back up here again. Let's see.
The theory that the church itself is to blame for its decline features a conservative and a liberal version. Both blame the hierarchy for not dealing properly with the sex abuse scandal. Liberals stress the lack of accountability and lay involvement, as if lay involvement would do, I guess, to break up the wink Crimson Mafia that's doing all this and with the sex abuse scandal. While conservatives point their finger at gay priests. I mean, I wouldn't say it's necessarily only gay, but I mean, it's the predatory grooming priest. Are you familiar with John Donahue of the Catholic League? I think I'm getting his first name.
Bill Donahue.
Bill Donahue. I love Bill Donahue because to me, he's like the old school East Coast, I don't give a damn Catholic. He's the leader of the Catholic League, and the Catholic League would always come out against, things that people were attacking the church. And he got that name from going back to Pius V. The Catholic League is when all the European kingdoms got together to fight the Ottoman Turks, because the Ottoman Turks were trying to invade into Europe, and then we beat them at the Battle of Lepanto, which is Pope Pius V was famous for. But either way, so he wrote a book on the clergy scandal, and he was showing the stats, and it's daunting. It's something like 80%. 70 to 80% of the bishops are a bat from that side of the plate, so to speak. And I'm not saying that they're actively batting from that side of the plate, but they have that orientation. But anyways, so he says that, and I think a lot of Catholic, no, I wouldn't say a lot of Catholics. I think Catholics in the know, who are woke, knew that the sex scandal was a pederast scandal. It was never like in the old days, the young priest who falls in love with this 16-year-old beautiful girl and, impregnates her and they have an affair. I mean, that was medieval Renaissance for sure. But the sex abuse scandal of the last 40 years was homosexual pederast priests targeting teenage boys, hebephilia.
Yeah.
How many Catholics really know that? And if you bring that up now, David, the first thing even weekly Catholics would say is that's homophobic to say that.
Oh yeah, no, they would. They definitely would. No, they definitely would. You know, during that time, you know, when I was, as I said, I was an altar boy. They changed the altar server to make it politically correct back in the late, I guess, 97, 98. But I did it for quite a while. And I spent a lot of time one-on-one with the priests because I would go over to the church and I would do gardening and stuff. I would do weeding and things. I would clean the church and they'd give me like $20 to do it. And my mother would always say to me, she's okay, if anything happens with any of those, because we knew these guys. I mean, they were, you know, I wouldn't say part of our family. We certainly felt that way because I became close with the priests. Never, ever did I ever feel that there was anything like that going on, that they would ever do such a thing. And if they did, I would not have. I'd be like, "Oh, this is weird. Like, go away." But I think that the priests who did that would, and this is from just reading about it and learning more about it over the years, they would go after vulnerable boys who had, you know, maybe had trouble home backgrounds, and oftentimes the priest would be invited into people's homes to have dinner, particularly in like Italian neighborhoods, where they'll have a family dinner. They'll invite the priest over, and so then the priest would take advantage of that, and then see where the kid was vulnerable because he didn't have a strong home life or something, and go after him that way. But you know, I agree. It's because these were homosexual priests, and that's, I mean, you know, homosexuals who are interested in molesting children are going to go to places where children are going to be around and where they're in a trusted position.
Look at the Boy Scouts. I mean, the Boy Scouts are pretty much out of existence now because of all the lawsuits, because that was another place they went. You look at, and going back to the priests, if you look at the statistics, I mean, the amount of priests that were caught, convicted of these things is something like 19 times less than public school teachers and daycare workers and social workers and all these places where it's rampant. So you'll see parents who don't want their sons to be altar boys because now pretty much every priest has been convicted as being a pederast because of the sex abuse scandal. And you can bring it up to them. It's like, you know, the percentage is like 0.3% of all American priests where we're doing that thing, or at least caught of doing that thing. But, you know, they don't want to hear, and I understand they want to protect their children, but you never had the experience where you felt like you were either were you ever around priests that you suspected were homosexuals?
Not until recently. I mean, like very recently, like here in Dallas. There's one priest, I really like the guy. I really, really like him, but I suspect that he may be a homosexual. But, you know, I don't know. He's a very good priest. I mean, he's very good. He's very, very good at his homilies. I mean, he's very engaging, particularly in the priests or in a parish like this that has a lot of young adults. So you
think so the priest in the church that's in the homosexual district has a homosexual pastor?
I'm not sure if he doesn't say I'm a homosexual.
Right.
He never talks about being a homosexual, but I just kind of think, you know what I mean? And I certainly
remember. Go ahead.
No, I said I certainly wouldn't accuse anybody of anything, because he espouses, you know, he talks about, you know, what's a sin and what isn't. You know, homosexuality has never been brought up to him, at least not that I've heard from him in the last year that I've been attending. But I just get you don't know what I'm talking about. So what were you going to say?
Growing up, I definitely saw priests that were effeminate, which of course doesn't mean that.
That's what I mean. Okay, that's probably a better way to describe him. A little feminine.
I also had, like, growing up in my Catholic school, there were the priests that were a little too touchy with the cheerleaders, you know, like the middle school cheerleaders. So, you know, I think it's like Paul mentions in 1 Corinthians 7, if you can control your urges, then you should become somebody in the ordained ministry, be a priest or whatnot. But if you can't, you should marry. He's very clear cut. He's like, I wouldn't say he supports MGTOW, but he certainly would say that if you can control your urges, it's best not to marry, because he talks about like, if you're going to be a religious or like lead a church and you have a family, your priorities are torn because you're dealing with the issues of having your kids and a wife, but you're also dealing with the issues of the church. So if you can control your libidinous instincts, then then.
Well, and what the Protestants' response to that is, how can somebody understand what a family is going through when they're not able to have one of their own? Which is what I hear from Protestants. I mean, I don't really associate with them much. I don't engage with them anymore. But that's the argument that I would hear.
Yeah. Well, I might do a future episode on that. I mean, you could just point him to 1 Corinthians 7 and be like, well, so you're saying that all leadership should be married? So it's like saying, like, I can't understand French politics unless I go to France.
Yeah.
It's like people can't have wisdom and prudence unless they've experienced those things. And that stuff doesn't invalidate the whole idea of the married clergy. The celibate clergy makes sense. It makes sense. Like Paul encourages it. Paul was celibate. He mentions it. He was a tent maker, and he wasn't doing things. And think about it, I think his ministry was probably more productive because he didn't have to deal with having a wife and family. But that's neither here nor there. So let's keep going to the article here, because it really gets to the part that we can talk about here.
Yep. Hey, how long do you want to go? Just another 15 minutes?
Yeah, whatever fits in your schedule here.
Oh, okay. No, I'm loving this. I'm really enjoying talking to you.
All right. Conservatives also blame the changes in the church ordered by V2. Prior to the council, the church was a rock of stability and certainty in a stormy world. Change undermined the credibility of the church because change was an admission that the church was wrong in the past. One week you would go to hell for eating meat on Friday. The next you were okay. One year you were told that the mass would always be in Latin. The next it would be in English. And hold on, there's another part about that. Let's get to the conservative part, and then we'll talk about that, and we'll look at the liberal argument, which of course there needs to be more reform. Conservatives also blame theologians for confusing the people by publicly debating moral and doctrinal matters that the hierarchy says are definitive teaching. They also believe that the social justice message of the church distracts from its traditional dogmas. Some argue that ecumenical and interreligious dialogue has led to the belief that all religions are equally valid. I mean, that is indifferentism. Emphasizing the role of the laity in the church took the priest off his pedestal and made the priesthood less attractive. Conservatives believe Pope Francis is going in the wrong direction and pray for a return to the policies of JP2 and Benedict XVI. I would say that there's some conservatives who would rather go back to, Pius X, Benedict XV, and Pius XII. I mean, there's some conservatives that do not think JP2 is a conservative by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah. So in the article, let me bring it up so we can refresh this. I won't bring it up on this screen now. Vatican II changed a lot of things in terms of believing what was one thing and now it's different, and ecumenical stuff and the social messages of the church. So let's go to the social messages of the church. So you went to a parish that was supporting illegal immigration. Now I have an episode coming up on that. Does the church support the breaking of the law? And the church is all about works of mercy, like the corporal works of mercy, right? Feeding people that are hungry and clothing people that are naked. And I don't think that's going to change. But you do see priests in that, especially like in the Valley down in Texas, that are openly harboring illegals. And that is a problem because you're violating civil law. And the church would never encourage people to violate civil law. So I think the church officially has the policy that we need to treat, and I don't think they would use the words illegal. Like growing up, we used the word illegal aliens. Now it's probably undocumented, or I think they have a new
documented citizens.
Yeah, there you go. So they're not gonna outwardly say that you should break the law, and but it's problematic because I think a lot of Catholics who are traditional are conservative, and they want a country to be able to determine who enters their borders. I mean, I don't think that is like a bad thing, right? If we have borders, I think we should have the right as a sovereign nation to determine what people who are not documented and not citizens have a right to come in. Like my father came from Mexico and he was a doctor. He had to apply for a visa. This is way back in the 60s. Yeah. And they went through it and are like, okay, this guy would contribute to society. Look at Ellis Island. Even at Ellis Island, people have this idea that we just accepted everybody who came over. No, if you had tuberculosis, they sent your butt back on the ship. Mm-hmm. But, it's a different time. Now it's like, let's just let everybody over. And I mean, look, so there's conservatives like me that are for more protection at the border. So when you hear stuff like the church is supporting illegals, it does maybe confuse the politically conservative Catholics, or maybe even angers them because the church is maybe supporting the breaking of the law.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think part of that also has to do with the fact that because fewer people attend church, they just need more people to come in. And so
that's such a cynical view. We need more people in the pews. The Mexicans are Catholics. Let's let them all in, so we'll get some collections from the pew.
I mean, am I saying anything that's not true? It's like, let's bring these people in here. They'll come to church. So, I mean,
well, I want to look at this. Okay, so would Pope Pius XII in the 1950s, or anybody pre-Vatican II, be wanting to bring in or be supportive of illegal immigration? I mean, I don't really know. I just think that the American church, does need to be careful on that topic because, like, we do want to be champions of social justice. We do want to help people with just the corporal works of mercy. Jesus talks about in Matthew 25. We need to do it. I just love it how the left will always talk about social justice, but then they're pro-choice. So it's like, we need to take care of all these people, but it's okay to murder the most unprotected of the human beings, right? Because they probably don't see them as human beings.
Yeah, they don't see them as human beings at all. It's just an inconvenience. It's when a woman's pregnant, it will slow down her career. It'll make her dependent on men.
Yeah, what about that heartbeat? Oh, shut up. That's what they'll say. It's like, we have this thing called the ultrasound. We have this thing. Shut up.
I remember, and again, this was back in the late 90s. I was at, it was back in Connecticut. I was at Mass, and the young priest at the time, stood up, and I remember he was basically yelling at the congregation saying, this is scientific evidence. This is proof that this is life. And you cannot be Catholic and support abortion. I mean, I was like,
it's a 5 Catholic non-negotiables. It's true. Now, the churches cannot say they support a certain party because they would lose their tax exempt status, which I think is a joke. The Catholic Church should just lose that so they can actually speak the truth. But from the pulpit, they cannot say support the Republican Party because they're pro-life. I would even.
And he didn't, but he just said, this is scientific proof. If you do not believe this, you are not Catholic, and you need to go into confession. I mean, I remember, as I said, I was a little kid, and my father's parents went to Mass every single day. I mean, every single day. They had 7. My dad's one of 7, so obviously they didn't contracept at all. And right at the end of my grandmother's life, she espoused a pro-choice position. Like, I know she voted for Clinton, and it was the last time it was one of the last times I saw her, and I was always kind of afraid of her because of the way that she just was certainly not a warm and kind person. And she touted herself as this very pious and devout Catholic, excuse me. And when she espoused a pro-choice position, I looked at her and I said, well, Grandma, that is absolutely anti-Catholic. I said, all those Masses you've attended, you're born in 1915, you've been to Mass thousands of times. Did you ever learn a thing? She was shocked that I talked to her this way. And so I think that even with people who are of an even of an older generation who should be very devout, sometimes they just aren't. You know?
Well, statistically, historically, at least in the last 40 years, Catholics are divided by party 50-50. It's 50% are Democratic, 50% are Republican. Historically, though, in the 19th century, when all the immigrants came in, the Democratic Party only existed because it was the party of immigrants.
Yeah.
And like my mother is a Catholic. She still goes to mass, but she, I would say she's a Kennedy, what we used to call a Kennedy Democrat. So they are for maybe more economic liberal stuff, but they're social conservatives because Kennedy wouldn't even recognize the Democratic Party of today that supports abortion, supports transgenderism, and all these things. The social platform of the Democratic Party has just gone off the crazy end.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
No
Well,
Democrat in the 50s or 60s or 70s would even recognize it.
Well, that congressman in South Texas nearly lost his, I think he's in a recount right now, nearly lost the runoff last week. He was the last pro-life Democrat in the House Democratic caucus. And he was challenged by the left by a vehemently pro-choice Democrat in the primary. And I think that it was like 800 votes that separates them. There hasn't been decided yet, but that's like he's like the last vestige of a pro-life Democrat. The rest have lost in primaries or they've retired. But so that's a change that's been made. Now, as far as Kennedy goes, as a matter of fact, I watched this documentary on Netflix last night about Marilyn Monroe, and they talked about how Bobby Kennedy and Jack Kennedy basically passed her back and forth, and how the Kennedy family, including especially the father, I mean, these guys were borderline perverts with their sexual appetite. I mean, these were not. I mean, it's like saying that the Kennedys were devout Catholics. No, they weren't. They weren't, and neither is Joe Biden. They advocate.
I don't think anybody would say that the Kennedys were like a paragon of moral virtue, but at least it's like what I feel about abortion, what I feel about legalizing prostitution, legalizing pot. We know that even if abortion was made illegal in the United States, which the Supreme Court overturning that might happen is not going to make it illegal. It's just going to go back to federalism, states. But I think there's something about this, about government not condoning a vice. I think there's something to it. So sure, the Kennedys were all corrupt because pretty much anyone that goes into politics, in my opinion, is either a megalomaniac or a narcissist. Because why would you go into politics? The Mr. Chips goes to Hollywood, Jimmy Stewart kind of guy, I feel doesn't exist. Or if you do get this kind of do-gooder who wants to affect change, they get corrupted by the power and the greed once they get in there. But at least with the Kennedys, I would say the Kennedys were outwardly Catholic, and to have a leader that is supportive, that is pro-life, and the 5 Catholic non-negotiables, I think it's great to have. Now, what they're doing personally, I mean, that's just human nature. We see that throughout time. But I'd rather have somebody that espouses Catholic teachings and supports them, and then in their private life, well, if they're fornicating and all that, well, I mean, that's between them and their maker.
That's an understatement to what these guys were doing back then. I can talk to you. I'll have to talk to you a little bit more about that offline at some point.
Well, I mean, I think I have a more cynical view of politicians, but I mean, to me, anyone in leadership is corrupt. I just automatically make the assumption that if you are a bishop, a cardinal, you're corrupt. That's the cynical me, and I would say that about a governor. And even though I like Governor Abbott, and I hope he gets reelected because Beto O'Rourke is just, let's not bore people with Texas politics, but I pretty much think anybody who's in power, I just don't trust. I just do not trust. If we had term limitations and we went back to the citizen politician, then I would trust it. Like if we had term limits, you could do 1 term and that's it. And then we have to bring in a new person, then maybe I would trust leadership. But with incumbency and all these things, you're just going to get corrupted. How much money are these politicians making on the side from the benefits of being in that office? And it's just power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. But let's get to the liberal part, because I think the liberal part is part we can
okay.
Because you would describe yourself as, I know you're a political conservative. Would you describe yourself as, I mean, essentially going back to your grandma really fast. So with your grandma, this is what I would tell pro-choice Catholics. So I would say, like, so you know better than Holy Mother Church, which is protected by the Holy Spirit. I mean, you think you know better that the killing of babies is a good thing and that the church is wrong when Jesus said he would never leave the church. I mean, this is the kind of argument. And I would just say, you're a cafeteria Catholic. You have the spirit of rebellion in you. We cannot pick and choose what we want to believe. If you want to do that, be a Protestant.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. And look, as I said, she was a very intimidating woman. This is when I was 25 when she passed away, and that was one of the last times I ever saw her. And I just, that's one of the last memories I have of her, was that she wasn't as devout as she claimed to be, or as what she wanted people to believe about her.
Well, maybe she was really devout and then she got corrupted by the secularist views, but it is sad.
No, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's.
You think she was a closet liberal her entire life?
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's go. Liberals believe Vatican II was just the beginning of reforms that were necessary for the church. They believe the hierarchy, especially JP2, feared chaos in the church and shut down any further reform. The documents of the council were interpreted through a conservative lens. What? The documents of the council were interpreted through. That statement is just rich. And theologians were labeled dissidents and silenced if they did not toe the Vatican line. Aren't every theologian and every Catholic supposed to toe the Vatican line? I mean, that's the definition of being a Catholic.
Yeah.
Commentators such as Andrew Greeley believe that the hierarchy lost a laity when Pope Paul VI reaffirmed the church's prohibition against artificial birth control. That is true. A lot of Catholics left because of that, because they're in rebellion.
Really?
The teaching was rejected by both moral theologians and the laity. Denying communion to divorced and remarried Catholics has also been problematic for couples and their children. Well, how about this? How about don't civilly divorce your wife or husband, remarry, and then get mad at the church when the church won't marry you because they don't want to contradict Matthew 19, where Jesus says anyone who remarries is committing adultery. So why don't you look into that before you follow your loins? And again, being disobedient to church. I'm going to do what I want to do, and then I'll get mad at the church later on if they don't satisfy my debased nature and be, I want to be a bigamist. What? I'm still married to my first wife? What? And then I'll leave and become an evangelical. See, it's all a spirit of rebellion. Mm-hmm. Liberals also blame the hierarchy for the vocation crisis because they argue there would be plenty of priests if they were allowed to marry, and even more if women were permitted ordination. Whoever wrote this, I just think when they just plug in the word liberal, they really mean most of the National Catholic Reporter.
It's written by priests. This is written by priests.
Is this written by a priest?
Yeah,
it is. There you go.
Father Thomas Rees, whoever he is.
No. Liberals also argue that the hierarchy's opposition to abortion and gay rights has alienated many people, especially the young. People have been alienated by bishops who denied communion to certain Democratic politicians. He's got tons on the liberals here.
I can't believe that they distribute the Eucharist to as many people as they do, frankly, who openly. I mean, I thought that
we could talk about that. I think the argument that EWTN would say is that it would lead to a PR issue, and it would lead to because let's finish up the liberal part here. Liberals say that the hierarchy is following much the same path it took in Europe, where it alienated the working class in the 19th century with its alliance with the upper classes, and that was actually more in the 18th century. But for much of the 20th century, anti-clericalism was non-existent in America because the bishops sided with the unions and the working classes. That is true, but that's not the only reason why anti-clericalism didn't exist at the time, because in the 20th century, the Catholics were supportive of the Vatican and all of its teachings. Anti-clericalism only blossomed when bishops aligned themselves with the Republican Party. What bishops are, 90% of the bishops are more supportive of the Democratic Party's ideology than that. This is just, okay. Well, let's get back to some of this stuff.
I mean, look, the Catholic Church pretty openly supported Obama when he was running, and then complained about his policies later on when he was so vehemently
Well,
approach?
I would say, well, I don't know if you could say the Catholic Church. I don't think Benedict would openly support any politician, but certainly I think the USCCB and the bishops here
Yeah.
were, yeah.
At least I remember hearing about in Connecticut, it certainly seemed that way.
Yeah, for sure. So let's look here. Liberals believe Vatican II was just the beginning of the reforms that were necessary for the church. They believe the hierarchy feared chaos in the church and shut down any further reforms. The documents were interpreted through a conservative lens. That certainly goes against the narrative that most people would say that the spirit of Vatican II was definitely in a liberal lens. I don't know anybody who thinks that the spirit of V2 was in a conservative lens. That is just mind-boggling. I mean, look at like pre-V2, right? We would fast on every Friday. Now it's only do it in Lent. You know, another one would be like, you should only be buried when you die. And then post V2, it's, oh, now cremation's okay.
Yeah, well,
V2, holy days of obligation. Go ahead.
I know. Well, like with that, like I didn't know that until very recently. A close friend of mine passed away from cancer, and he asked that he wanted his ashes cremated. He wanted to be cremated, and he wanted his ashes spread over the Grand Canyon. So I facilitated this in his will. I facilitated this, and then afterwards, I was told, I was like, "Hey, you got to go to confession. That's absolutely that's a significant sin. You need to go confess." And I was like, "Well, I've never heard that before because the priests don't talk about it. They don't. There are quite a few rules that's rarely discussed."
Yeah. I talked about this in an episode like 2 weeks ago, like the changes in Catholic matrimony and funeral stuff. So you will get Catholics who are like, Mima wants to be buried or have her ashes spread in the river. Then they go to the church. The church says, I'm sorry, you can't do that. You can cremate her and then put her in a ciborium and then, put her in the church or in the ground. They get mad, then they leave the church, right? There's no thing about, why don't you support and understand why Holy Mother Church has the teachings as it does and be obedient to it instead of you being your own pope and be like, no, I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah. Well, again, part of the reason that I did this is because I didn't know, because it isn't talked. A lot of these things simply are not discussed unless you go and you have to do significant research to figure this out. Now that's obviously research isn't that significant, but there are quite a few things. And one of the other things I wanted to talk about before we wrap up is some pre-Cana things. But if these rules aren't properly explained with relative frequency, people aren't going to follow them because they don't know about them, and they're not going to.
No, but I think that's true. Like if you're ignorant about it, but my retort to that is we're all literate, and if we call ourselves Catholics, we should be reading the catechism or going to Catholic Answers or doing these things. But even if you don't know a lot about the Catholic faith, when the priest says we don't cremate and spread the ashes on the beach, why can't the person just say, okay?
Yeah, no, that's what I mean. But when does he say
that?
They
should say that.
Yeah, I just don't hear, and that's not the only example. I can give quite a few that I've as I was preparing for this that I've.
What are the other examples?
Well, like in okay, so during Lent, I went to a fish fry. Priest sat down, different priest than the one who's effeminate. This is a young guy, and I said, Father, why is it that from the pulpit you never discuss cohabitation? It's a grave sin.
You brought this up to the priest?
Oh, yeah.
Wow, your balls. He loved that.
Gregory, I listen to you every single day. Every day, like I wake up with you and I listen to you, and sometimes I get very inspired by the things that you say.
Well,
and
thank you.
I'm going to go and I want to thank you because you are so articulate that but anyway, I don't want to toot your horn too much.
No,
but anyway,
I want to hear what the priest said, because I've done this thing with priests too, and you got to do it in charity. They're going to get defensive, especially if they're modernist. But go ahead. What did the priest say?
Okay, so I said, listen, I said, Father, I really enjoy attending this church. One of the reasons why is because I'm not the youngest person here anymore, and you have a lot of couples. I have a feeling that if you were to check, there are quite a few of these couples who are coming up and receiving the Eucharist, who attend regularly, who are cohabitating, and quite a few of the couples who you go through pre-Cana with are also cohabitating, and you may just give them a wink and a nod and say you really shouldn't cohabitate, but they're always going to. They may say, "Yeah, we're cohabitating," and you say, "Please separate," and they don't, and you still marry them. Why isn't this discussed from the pulpit? I very rarely ever hear you or anybody else stand up and say, you should not be cohabitating. You're endangering your own soul by doing this. And frankly, you're endangering the possibility of your marriage.
You said that to the priest?
Yeah, of course I did. And he was like, he got a little bit defensive. And then I brought him back to another couple. And he's like, well, when a man and woman love each other, it's very natural that they would come together. And I said, no, I understand all of that. I know everybody is sinful, but isn't it your job to remind people that this is a grave sin? And he said, I'd really like to keep our conversations. Can we get it up to a more? He finally said, can we get to a more positive subject? And I said, no, let's.
So he never addressed it. He never addressed it.
He addressed it the way that I just said. He said people naturally come together, and we would hope that they wouldn't do that. And that was essentially the end. And I tried to push him more, and that it just wasn't. I had a bunch of other people around the table, and they weren't disagreeing with me. I think they're actually interested in hearing it too. But I've done this several times, and I really don't understand why. Like, what's the hesitation?
Okay, so the hesitation, it's from a pastoral perspective. It's kind of like when going back to the annulment remarriage thing, they don't want to alienate people. And so it's kind of like meet the person where they're at now and then kind of guide them in gingerly. And from a pastor's perspective, I think going back to Mammon, part of their mind is about, we got to fill the coffers. We have to get the money, because a lot of people don't know this. It's not like the Vatican sends money to every diocese. Every diocese is independent in terms of their finances. So I think they're thinking that and then we don't want to alienate. I think also too that maybe, the priest, again, going back to the stat about maybe being active anything, they just maybe don't really believe in that idea, or maybe they're just defeated. They know like everybody's doing it. But you're right. I've told my friends, like, if I was a deacon, I think my pastor would let me do one homily, and then he would say, Gregory, you're never doing a homily again, because I would be the deacon who would say this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because that's what they're supposed to do, right? It's better to have a millstone wrapped around your neck and thrown in the ocean than to make my little one sin. So the priest should be, or the deacons should be saying, stop aborting, don't support abortion, don't contracept, it's a grave sin, don't cohabit, you're gonna have a higher rate of divorce if you do cohabit, and go through all the things and just say, if you don't agree with the church's teaching, A, read up on it, and B, ultimately, like Mary did, be according to thy will, or to thy word. I don't understand what's going on, but be according to thy word. Just be humble and know that Holy Mother Church and its deposit of faith knows much more than you, average Catholic with, an education at some Northwest directional university. But you have the audacity, person in the pew who is a modernist, a liberal Catholic, to think that you know better than the Holy Mother Church protected by the Holy Spirit. It's just the pride and the cognitive dissonance is mind-blowing. That being said, David, going back to pre-Cana, when I was going through pre-Cana, I was fornicating with my wife, soon-to-be wife. So I was in there. I was, I was one of those people. But how would I have handled it if I was told by the pulpit to stop doing it? I would know that he's right. Every Catholic knows. Every Christian knows. Just read scripture. Fornication's wrong. But would I have stopped? Probably not. Honestly.
Right. Well, how did, and frankly, that's one of the reasons why I find you a little bit more credible in a lot of ways. Like you've talked about how you have several children by two different women, right? One of which you weren't married to.
Yes, it's not something that I like to talk about here, but yes, that is true.
Well, I mean, I think that shows that you're not, you're very humble. I mean, you talked about it before. You talked about it up there. You love all of your children, but you wouldn't go out and tell people to do the same thing. I
Right.
mean,
I'm a cautionary tale, I think, in a lot of
yeah,
ways. For sure.
yeah. So
Yeah.
I don't, like nobody. I mean, when you talk to priests and you talk to other people about it, you're not there to condemn or to say that you're better than anybody else, but you're very relatable with it. And I think that's when you say meeting people where they are, like meeting people where they are at. Somebody met you where you were at when you talked about it, and when you discussed it, and nobody's thrown you out of the church as a result of it. So even though that happened, nobody said, "Okay, Gregory, get out of here. We don't like your kind." You've still been welcomed in. Nobody's ever told you to leave.
Well, like I've met people who judge me.
Sorry, go ahead.
I've met people who judge me for the mistakes of my past and having, a lot of kids. And I just say, look, I did fornicate in the past and I made a vow of chastity a long time ago. So the only way I would have sex is in marriage, the sacrament of matrimony. And I tell them, I go, do we judge Paul for killing Christians? Do we judge Peter? Do we judge St. Augustine for probably being the most licentious man of Christian history before he converted? I mean, you don't judge people from their past. You judge them by their current fruit. And if we judge St. Paul by his past, I mean, he's the most prolific writer of the New Testament. He's the biggest evangelist of Christian history. I mean, then we would just kind of throw away 80% of the New Testament because Paul was Saul and he killed Christians? No. So yeah, I was not perfect and I'm not perfect now, but I'm not a hypocrite because hypocrites are those that are actively telling you stop fornicating and they're fornicating.
Well, at the same time, you're not going out and saying, this is okay. I don't believe in this part of the Catholic Church. It's fine that I was fornicating. You say, no, this was wrong. I shouldn't have been doing it. Like, that's a different message.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm completely obedient to Holy Mother Church. And there's not really a teaching that I don't agree with. Certainly there's teachings that I don't understand, like the mystery of transubstantiation, the mystery of the Trinity. That's why I don't have episodes really on those things, because I mean, they're mysteries, right? We don't know exactly how they work. We have arguments about like how they work, and the early theologians covered the Trinity in their early church councils, but I don't really touch those because they're very hard to understand. But I mean, I'm pretty 100% supportive of all the church teaching. And if there's a church teaching I don't agree with, then I will submit in humility. Now, some of the post-Vatican II expressions or sentiments, some of them I have some issues with. I'm not a big fan of the ecumenical movement. I think the ecumenical movement pre-Vatican II was the Catholic Church is the only way. The Catholic Church is the best way. Yes, Protestants can be saved through the Catholic Church, but everyone needs to be Catholic. And then post-Vatican II, I'm sure you've seen the John Paul II Assisi meeting. You've seen Benedict had an ecumenical meeting with the same thing. You see pictures of JB2 kissing the Quran. You saw Francis with the Pachamama. And there's more of this. Now the ecumenism is, well, essentially, like the preferred way. I think it was James Martin, or was it Bishop Barron? One of them said, I think it was on the Jewish conservative guy. What's his name? I can't remember. But he came on his show, and said, well, the Catholic Church is the preferred way. And I just wanted to go, would Pope Pius XII have said that? No. Would Leo XIII have said that? No. So now to me, it's like the ecumenical movement of the Catholic Church today is essentially there's many ways, but we're the preferred way. It's like, what kind of salesman are you if you're like, well, it's the preferred way?
Yeah.
So you wanted to talk about pre-K because I know we're running a little long here.
Yeah. See, let me know. So in what I was getting to with pre-Cana is how, and it was part of the question that I asked the other day. I met a young guy who's going through annulment. His marriage only lasted about 9 months. He married a non-Catholic and he's obviously practicing the fact that he's showing up to like an after the mass kind of meeting that I met him at. And I said, well, what did they discuss with you in pre-Cana? He said, oh, they spent most of the time talking about.
Well, David, let's back it up. So he is divorced and he's waiting for his annulment, but he's in pre-Cana with a new woman?
Oh, no. I asked him, I said, what was you're trying to get an annulment right now. Your marriage lasted 9 months, so they're not totally divorced yet. I said, what was your pre-Cana process like?
Before you got
married. And I said, first of all, was she Catholic? He goes, no. I was like, okay, well, so she's gonna have probably no problem with divorce. I said, who filed it for her? Right? He's like, oh yeah, she filed on me. I was like, yeah, of course she did.
Of course she did, yeah.
So I started, I had to actually stop myself from spewing out too much,
well, we have an episode here on how MGTOW has affected Catholic matrimony. So, we can talk about kind of MGTOW principles. But for those of you who don't know, and you can easily Google this, the large majority of divorces are initiated by the woman. So that's why David made that response, how the woman divorced him. But keep going.
So I said, okay, what was your pre-Cana process like? And he said, well, most of it, they focused on the 5 love languages. I said, wait, they made you read that book? He goes, oh yeah. And so I was like, gosh, there is nothing about that book that
I have not read it. So can you want to give it like a summary if you've read it, like what it is about, or like
I'm not sure if I can, hold on, let me pull up the 5 love languages. Okay. So let's go ahead. Okay, it was written by a guy named Gary Chapman back in the early 90s. And it said that the 5 love languages are acts of service, gift giving, physical touch, quality time, and words of affirmation, which is essentially chore play. For you're going through problems in your marriage, and this is what he indicated. He said, "Oh, I went back to the 5 love languages, and I said the acts of service." So he tried to do things for the wife. That didn't work. He gave her gifts. And then she wasn't giving him any physical touch, which is what he wanted. He tried to spend more quality time with her, and then giving her words of affirmation. None of this is there you go. None of this is Catholic or even Christian based. This is a new age kind of thing. And the result of it was he got divorced. He's getting divorced now, and he's trying to go through an annulment. So I wonder what the purpose is of, if you have a couple that comes that's probably cohabitating, one may be Catholic, the other maybe not, and then instead of discussing the real problems that you're going to have, your real issues that could come into your marriage, they're discussing this kind of thing. So that's
okay. Well, I'm reading this right now. So look, there's nothing in this little meme thing that is like anti-Catholic. Encourage, affirm, appreciate, empathize. That's fine. Send an unexpected note. Yeah. Non-verbal, use body language and touch. Everybody likes to be held and all that. But acts of service, do chores together, and make breakfast in bed. Go out of your way to help alleviate their daily workload. So you think that a lot of this is just like simping out to the woman?
Of course it is. This is chore play. This is chore play. This isn't okay. You always say work on your sheetrock.
Yeah.
This isn't. It's like, okay, well, if you lose something to prepare you for marriage better. And again, I have not been married, never really come close, because it always got to the point where I'm like, there's some red flags here. I think we're gonna end this right here. I'm going to mass by myself, so it's like, let's, Anyway, it's like, okay, if you lose your job, there's a good chance that your marriage is going to end. They didn't talk about that. If she meets somebody at work who she's more attracted to, that's going to be her temptation.
Wait. See, you're coming from the MGTOW perspective. You really think that a Catholic pre-Cana is going to be telling men to make guard?
I think they should
talk about SMV and hypergamy. They would never do that.
I think that they should, if they want to properly prepare people for marriage who are Catholics, then they need to talk about these things. But throwing the 5 love languages book to a couple of people thinking about marriage, and this is what you need to do. This tells the man what he needs to do, and this will save your marriage, and it doesn't. That's my point.
I mean, look, I think that I can imagine a MGTOW guy running pre-Cana. No, I mean, it would just be funny. Like the meeting would last a minute. He'd walk in, don't marry. He'd walk out. That's it. It's over. Well, look, I mean, I do think that they should throw out the new agey stuff, and I mean that is another episode we could do on the new age infiltration in a lot of the Novus Ordo parishes, like with this the centering prayer and with yoga as one of the extracurricular activities, and I mean there's tons of these problems in a lot of the Novus Ordo parishes, but I do think like pre-Cana, I think some of these uncomfortable stats should be brought up. 50% of marriages end in divorce. The other 25 are unhappy. Would we get on a plane that crashes 75% of the time? I think that's a legitimate thing to bring up because a lot of these kids are just, living the Pollyanna, oh, we're going to love each other forever, da, 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 da. So I think bring that up. I would bring up women do initiate divorce 90% of the time. When there's a divorce and the woman is college educated, 90% of the time it's initiated by the woman. And then have that discussion. Why do we think this is? And then maybe have a discussion on the sacrament of matrimony and no fault divorce and how Catholics are supposed to marry for life and all these things. And then bring up the question, why is the Catholic divorce rate as high, almost as high as the secular divorce rate? I think those are good things to bring up and throw out a lot of the lovey in the chore play, because actually the stats do show the more chores a man does, the higher rate of divorce. So Cristobal, who I know Cristobal because he posts everywhere, this guy got married at 21, wife was a virgin at 18. She was 18 when they got married. They have 4 kids, and he's always saying he's maintaining frame. He tells her straight out, you have to stay, and she's like 40 now. You got to stay skinny, be beautiful. He works, she stays at home. He did the allowance thing on her. And he's got a great marriage because he says straight gender norms work. But I think it's important to talk about the indissolubility of marriage. And I would bring it up to any man who's going to marry. You ask the woman, if I cheat on you, will you divorce me? Because that is grounds for an annulment, not believing in the indissolubility of marriage. So, and you can say the same thing. If you cheat on me, would I leave you? Now, the answer is supposed to be no, you're never going to leave your spouse. But that is a question to bring up the hard stuff. And I did pre-Cana 20 years ago. I can't really speak to what it was like. I don't remember, but all the 5 love languages stuff sounds pretty familiar to me.
Yeah. Well, I brought this up because I figured there are people who are going to be watching and listening to this who are either going through this now or will be going through it, and it's something that they should really consider when they're in it. Because I mean, if I were in one of these pre-Cana classes, I would absolutely bring this up. And it would
you would, because you know about men going their own way. But remember, the large majority of men in their 20s who are what we would say blue pill have no idea, and they're not going to bring up these things. I do think one of the problems with Catholic matrimony now is just annulments. And I mentioned this with Amber Rose, and Amber was totally fine with marrying a Protestant. You called in, so I don't know if you heard that part, but
I did hear that part. She thought that like Catholic guys were dorks or they were controlling or something.
Yeah. That was the take.
Abusive.
If you read the comments, there was some that were saying like she's very young, she'll learn as she gets older. But I would say like you can't make vast generalizations about Catholic men based on the maybe small pool of trad Catholic men you've met. Mm-hmm. And I would say the same thing. You can't make generalizations about the Protestant men in your life and extrapolate that out and say that all marrying a Protestant wouldn't be a problem. I don't want to speak for her because she's not here. But the annulment success rate is so high. It's around 70%. So I think in some ways the Protestants will always say that annulment is a Catholic divorce. And on one level, they are right. Because if a Catholic is not happy and, we live in the world of no fault divorce, they'll be like, yeah, I'll get the civil divorce. 7 out of 10 chance that I'll get an annulment and I can remarry. All right, I'll take those chances. And that's the problem. So annulment, a success rate pre-Vatican II was not even 10%. And you look at like Henry VIII, right? Henry VIII won an annulment. The church said no. And of course, he left the church and he took England with him. But I think that is a problem. I do think that we need to make annulments less successful.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to happen.
I don't think so.
In the church climate we're in. So I think that is just another temptation for people to divorce is, okay, I'll take my chances, I'll break up the family because I'm not happy and I'll take my chances. And then if I don't get the annulment, I'll just run to the evangelical church and they'll marry me. Because it's about me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Gregory, I think to wrap this up, I'll sort of circle back to the beginning and talk about why I'm not married. And it's obviously my own choices. And I look at my parents' marriage, that's lasted a very long time. They're still married today. I don't know. I simply cannot separate. The world what the church pushes and believes in things like pre-Cana, where they're going to say, okay, you're coming together, we'll never be separated, and then the reality of what the world is, and people were more than 50% of marriages will end in divorce. I'm not gonna, and I don't expect to meet a woman like my mother who's going to spend the equivalent of $3,000 to fly across the country and see me and then eventually convert to Catholicism and be very, very devoted and to the degree that she is now. And but at the same time, I think, okay, well, is this still possible? Yes, but I'm not actively going to go out and seek it because, frankly, it's a waste of time.
Look, I don't want people to have a cynical view of marriage. I think some of it is just choosing the right person. That's important. But also understanding that all of us have been infected by some cultural Marxist tool. So like with the women, it's radical feminism. So you definitely have to vet your woman to see if she's got latent radical feminist tendencies. And I would say the women need to vet the man to see if he's got latent simpery and kind of femininity issues and he's not going to lead. I mean, women complain about that all the time. And I think it's a legitimate complaint that there aren't a lot of masculine men. Do I think that there's unicorns, as they say? Sure. I mean, we can look around. Your mom apparently was a unicorn. Now, the question is, should men in the milieu of no-fault divorce, where you can lose half your assets, your kids, alimony, all these things, should they take the chance? That's ultimately up to the man. What I would say is, of course, you can't fornicate. So, and this is what the culture pushes, is the pump and dump. And I'm not, of course, encouraging that. Should you choose, if someone choose not to marry, then you got to be chaste.
Yeah.
I mean, there's binary.
Yeah. Well, it was a very different, in the 70s, things were different. That was during the sexual revolution. There was still a large amount of the country that did not go for that. And my parents were certainly fell into that category. And now we're like horrified with what's going on, but not in any way ignorant. But also, my family doesn't push me into something that they know largely, I don't want to say doesn't exist, but is very rare. And going back to I ran into my now retired elementary school nurse, and she said, "Why aren't you married?" I said, "Well, you see young women in here?" The answer is no. You're like, well, you answered your own question. That's why. So
they'll say you're a misogynist.
Not at all. I just said, you see, there were no young women in that church. It's a good sized church. And when I was growing up, it was full, and now it's like half empty on some days, unless you go for the twice a year Christians who are there on twice a year.
Sure. And we don't have good fellowship in parishes. We don't have a lot of outreach because, again, why would they have a young group, a young 20-something group if there's no young 20-somethings going? I would tell you this, if part of you does want to marry, go to the Mater Dei church that I told you about, or the ordinariate, and then join Catholic Match. And you can filter on Catholic Match for mass preference, political ideology, and all these things, and give it a shot.
Yeah. Well, and as I said, it's not a goal by any means. I brought this up because I think it'll be helpful for some of your other viewers. I enjoy doing what I want, when I want, where I want, as you like to say. But that's also a selfish thing. It really is. So I know that I should, you know, seek to marry and to have children. I find it very,
Well, it's
you know,
up
and
to
I
you. If you have a biological desire to have children, then you need to be honest with yourself. And then at that point, well, then you're going to have to get married. If you don't have a paternal nature, or you're like, I'd be totally fine if my DNA line extinguished with me, then, read 1 Corinthians 7 and just be single year forever. But you're going to have to be chaste.
well, I am, I am. I said to I was having dinner with a priest about 6 or 7 months ago, and it was I had a family that was like a host family when I was in college, and that the man is now a deacon, and so obviously his wife had to go through that process with him, and I was having burgers with this couple, all three of them were boomers, and the priest, and they were asking me, I said, well, David, are you dating anybody? I said, no, I'm not, and I may be a confirmed bachelor. Frankly, I'm okay with that. And the priest was like, really? Okay. And I was like, look, I don't know that I can help anybody in that regard, but
well, I think when you tell people that you're a bachelor, that the common response is you're a misogynist, because well, I would say a common response from women would be like, you don't like women, because these are the shame tactic languages that you get if you tell people that you're not married, especially if you bring up no fault divorce and hurting the kids and all that.
Well, it's happened more now that I'm in my late 30s. I mean, I just turned 39 a couple months ago, and I think after I turned 35, I would hear this more from people, and I'm like, really? What? Like, who cares? What? But I said, you know me. I go to church every Sunday, and I'm pretty devout. I'm always learning about Catholicism. I'm always interested in it, but I'm not gonna put myself in a position that could frankly destroy my life, or if I had children, destroy theirs. I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I only see my kids, 4 days a month.
Right. Yeah. It is tough.
Horrible. It's horrible. It would be horrible on. Okay, speak for yourself. It's horrible on you, and it's horrible on them. You have to deal with some other guy is around your children more often than you are. I can't even imagine going through something like that. And I had quite a few friends when I was growing up who were the children going through that themselves. As a result, now most of them are divorced. So, as I said, I think it would be wonderful to be married and to have a family and to raise them in the church. But ultimately, it's like, hey, I have to look at the world for what it is, and not everybody is.
I would tell you that if you do want to have kids, though, that you should try to find a wife and go to the traditional circles, because you don't want to be on your deathbed and say, oh, I wish I had children, and then you don't have any children. So I would tell you that if you can vet the woman well and go to a trad cath community like Mater Dei or one of these, and go on Catholic Match and just search for trad caths. I think if you want to have kids, and you say you want to have kids, so I think I would not want you to have like a cognitive dissonance.
So I'm not saying, I'm saying I'm not opposed to being married and having children. Like, I'm not opposed to it, but I'm not like, I absolutely need to have children. That's not what I'm saying. Would I like to? It would be very nice, but I'm also not going to. It's such a big risk. It is just, and you know this better than anybody else. It is the biggest risk you can ever take.
Would you regret on your deathbed if you never had children?
No.
Okay. Really quick, I want to go through this last paragraph, because I know you got to leave here, but if you have like 5 minutes, I love this last paragraph by this priest. Can you see it?
Yes. Liberals
also blame the hierarchy for the vocation crisis, because they argue there'd be plenty of priests who are allowed to marry, And then the liberals also argue the hierarchy's opposition to gay rights is alienating people. So essentially what they're saying here is, let's just change teachings of the church that we've had for centuries. I mean, that's what, quote, the liberals are saying here, that we just need to change the church's teaching on contraception, change the church's teaching on allowing divorced and not annulled men from receiving the Eucharist, change the church's teaching on ordained female clergy, which it can't. Even JP2 said we will never have female priests. Change the church's discipline on having celibate priests. So that's the liberal answer to everything: is throw out the deposit of faith. Let's continue the reforms of Vatican II that we didn't finish. And then if you bring it up, well, you are changing fundamental Catholic teachings that have been around forever. They'll be like, we could be like the Episcopalians.
I don't know why. Why do they want to make these changes? There are plenty of other. If they don't want to follow the church's guidelines as they are and as they've been for centuries, there are plenty of other places for them to go. There really are. And
well, I think the Synod. Go ahead.
What?
Go ahead.
No, I don't want to push anybody out, but at the same time, it's like, how much can you compromise? At some point, if you don't stand for something, you stand for nothing, is the saying. Again, that I've heard you say many times.
And that's happened to the mainstream Protestant denomination. So you're saying well, then go be an Episcopalian that has open, active lesbian and homosexual bishops. Well, I would say, why don't they? It's because I would tell you that there is a strand of the liberal Catholic that are cultural Marxists, and they want to destroy the church, like Bella Dodd predicted back in the 1930s when communists infiltrated the clergy and all these things. And I think they just want to destroy the church. I mean, we are the number one target from the radical left since pre-French Revolution. That's why they're not leaving, because they have a job to do, and their job is to undermine, infiltrate, and destroy the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
and that's what it is.
There's an interview from, I think, around the early 60s with Mike Wallace and Margaret Sanger. And it seemed like, I would encourage you to go and watch it. It's on YouTube. It's about an hour long, maybe less. But it seems like her goal was to destroy the Catholic Church. Like, she's vehemently anti-Catholic.
Well, she's on record as saying that we need to eliminate the dim-witted and the blacks. Yeah. She wouldn't use the word homosexual, of course. African American, but she would say we need to eliminate the dim-witted. She was part of the eugenics program of the 20s and 30s. So, and you tell this to blacks or Hispanics, because they put the PP clinics in their neighborhoods, that they target them. And there's more awareness now than certainly there was 10 years ago, where Planned Parenthood has essentially canceled Margaret Sanger, because even they realize that she is a liability, because you can read her writings. Mm-hmm. And she was actually in correspondence with Nazi officials in the 30s. Yeah. She had, their agenda, unfortunately, is still being played today. But either way, anything else you want to talk about in the last few minutes?
Gregory, this has been an absolute pleasure. As I've said, I speak for other people who are watching, is that you have been very helpful to me, and I hope a lot of others, at properly articulating some of the beliefs that can be kind of confusing to somebody like me who's been Catholic my entire life. So I really appreciate everything that you do, and I hope you'll continue.
And I thank you for patronizing the channel. I do have to ask you the rapid fire questions I've asked the other two guys. So do you have a favorite saint?
St. George is my saint that I chose when I was confirmed, because he refused to. Basically, he's martyred. He refused to deny his faith when he was killed for it.
It's funny because most men relate to the martyrs. We like martyrs and men who are masculine and won't deny the faith. What is your favorite? Do you have a favorite decade of the Rosary? Is there a history that you relate to more?
What is it? I guess it was when Jesus got, what was the one where Jesus got the crown of thorns?
The third one, third circle.
Third one. That one. I think about the crucifixion as, Jesus's suffering was actual torture. He continued on, so I think that's the one.
And then, is there a religious pilgrimage that you've gone to that you really love, or is there a place that you would like to go to that you haven't?
I do want to go to Rome. If they ever, I haven't taken the devil's serum, so maybe a while.
Well, I think they don't require the devil's serum anymore. I think we can go over there and not have to show proof of it.
Okay, well, that's where I want to go. I've always wondered about, I went to confession a couple of weeks ago, and I had actually had to ask the priest to clarify his confession because it was so vague. He just said basically pray for Ukraine or peace or something. And I thought, man, imagine what it would have been like back in the day if the priest were to say, you need to make a pilgrimage to Israel.
That's how it was. Like if you did something really egregious, do the Camino of Santiago, get to it. And now it's like, sometimes you don't even get a penance. And the confession is legitimate even without a penance.
Yeah.
But yeah, you'll get these vague ones where it's just like.
That's the first time I've ever had a really vague penance before. I was like, because I actually I stood up and I was like, can you clarify for me one more time what penance here? Because at least tell me to say if you are. No, it's just like pray for the people of Ukraine and children. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, well that's cool. Yeah. Anyway, no pilgrimage to Israel, but I do want to make a pilgrimage to Rome.
I've been to Rome a couple of times. I'm not interested in going to Israel for political reasons. That government and we'll just leave it at that. So, David, thank you for coming on. Maybe we'll bring you on in a couple more months. We could talk about another topic and focus more just on one topic.
Thank you so much, Gregory.
You're welcome, David. Take care.
God bless.
You too. So that was David, and thank you for coming on. I know these live streams are long; they're almost the length of a movie. I need to learn to talk less, but it's just fun to just shoot the sheetrock with different Catholics and get their perspective. So I appreciate you guys who watch this live, and I appreciate any of you guys who watch it later on. If there's anything you got out of it, share with other people, and I would appreciate that. Take care. God bless and pray.